Good morning, everyone. Taking a look at deep state map, we have a picture of the overarching battle in Ukraine. Now, this is usually run a few days behind on purpose, so that they're not giving away any kind of tactical information in their mapping systems. And we can see in the green the Ukrainian areas they have retaken, and then obviously the red, different red hues we have where Russia's sitting. So, I want to talk about the Kherson region right now. Obviously, you can see where we're at with Crimea. uh, I'm going to be talking about what's in here briefly. So, with regard to this, we're zooming in on Kherson. Oops, wrong way. Zooming in on Kherson. As you can see, the Dnieper River runs right here. What we're looking at right now is potentially Ukrainian forces have established a bridgehead across the river in this region right here. So Ukrainian forces have crossed the river and seems to have established positions and defensive positions in this region, infiltrating Russian forces, not necessarily their forces, but infiltrating Russian-held ground. Russian military bloggers have shown video confirmation of geolocated footage with actual textual reports of the presence of Ukrainian forces on what is the left bank or east part of the Dnieper River. And this is as of yesterday. Now, the exact scale and intentions of this presence has yet to be determined. The videos we've seen show multiple small craft crossing over into the Russian-controlled territory from the Ukrainian-controlled territory, uh, essentially trying to establish a security area here, probably to try and take this road right here to establish a logistics supply line. Apparently, they have been here since April 20th and maintained the positions on the east bank of the Dnieper River in Kherson. This has allowed them to establish a stable supply line to these positions and regularly conduct sorties or missions or operations out of this area. And it's really suggesting Russia has a lack of control over the area. I've talked about this before, but as we zoom out, so you can kind of see, I'll recircle where we are so you don't lose track. But this is an area where probably Ukraine assessed a good amount of weakness. So down here in this region right here. The reason for them assessing there's probably a good amount of weakness is the majority of fighting has taken place in this region right here. So they've likely surged forces to two locations from the rest of the front line. The Russians assumed that the river would provide enough of a defensive capability to keep Ukraine from potentially attacking from Kherson. So what they're doing is the Russians have redeployed forces to this theater here, and likely have redeployed forces up near Zaporizhia, which is where the assumed major push for the spring, quote unquote, spring counteroffensive that I still just don't think is going to take place for a little while because of the mud, but it seems to be somewhat drying out there. That being said, it might have been a target of opportunity in the Kherson region. They may have seen that many of the Russians have abandoned this region. So I'm not saying this is the beginning of the counteroffensive. I'm also not saying this is not the beginning of the counteroffensive. This has the look of potentially being a shaping operation to potentially pull forces from this region to here to try and have to defend. So as I've said before, what makes the most sense tactically is if you zoom in on this region, what makes the most sense tactically is for the Ukrainians to try to connect this body of water to this body of water here by moving downward and driving a wedge from the Russian supply lines into Crimea. This effectively will cut off much of the Russian resupply capability of their troops to basically the whole area. So that is kind of what the assumption is for many people on the offensive. But the Ukrainians are successfully landing forces in across the river here in Kherson. So again, the Ukrainians may see this as a target of opportunity to establish a bridgehead That if they can actually establish and hold this and continue to grow their presence there, that becomes very difficult for the Russians, because then you have the potential threat of an attack from here, and then a potential threat of an attack from here. And these would be sweeping downwards, and you could almost see what would be considered like a larger double envelopment, but I don't think they would connect. This is a lot of territory still to try and cover, but we've seen a lot of force buildup for the Ukrainians. So either way, we're looking at some movement on the battlefield right now. What's happening is there's a lot, the slow rate of artillery fire, the over centralization of Russian military command that has allowed the Ukrainians to be more rapid, more responsive on the battlefield. And so you see major muscle movements from the Russians taking a long time trying to get where they need to go. And as we all know, the current major fighting has been, for months now, has been heavily focused in this region. So they likely have gotten complacent along this Kherson front. It's still a very target-rich area for both sides, but it seems the Russians, again, using 100-years-old tactics, are just surging troops to singular points on a battlefield, whether it's here or earlier in the year it was up here, or last year it was down here. So again, potentially seeing some movements on the battlefield for a shaping operation. If not, the Ukrainians may have just been like, hey, the Russians basically left this area. And I can tell you from multiple studies of previous wars, establishing a bridgehead across a river from a major city in a defended territory is extraordinarily dangerous. So the fact that the Ukrainians were able to establish one in this region right here, directly across from a supply hub in the city, which is Kherson, shows some audacity on the Ukrainians' part, but also likely some incompetence or a lack of forces completely in this region by the Russians. And this, if they can hold this whole area right here, the Ukrainians, it definitely establishes the potential to start a resupply efforts into conducting more advanced, more hard-hitting offensives in this region that the Russians, frankly, are going to have to respond to, or it's going to be yet another embarrassing loss for them in this region. And from what seems to be just in the in the near term, skirmishes from probably highly trained troops establishing that bridgehead for Ukraine to possibly move on other more more high value targets, such as here, here, and here. But we'll see. That's just the current movements right now on the battlefield, and this was a significant one, so I wanted to let you guys know what's going on.